Welcome back to Fixing Furniture. My name is Scott Bennett, and I believe that furniture repair skills are a disappearing craft, and that's why I make these videos. This is the first part of a two-part series about how to repair split wood. I've got two examples here I'll be working through. The first one is a blanket box that was previously repaired and repaired incorrectly and is broken. The second one is a lamp table. This is a pre-Confederation table, and I'll tell you some of the history about that, but this has been repaired at least once, probably several times, and it's broken as well. So in the first one, I'm going to go through this blanket box. Stick with me. I'll show you how it's done.
As a furniture repair business, we're opening the doors to our workshop to show you the tools and techniques to repair furniture.
The front rail here, you can see this has been broken off.
We give you tips to make your repair projects easier. Let's get into the workshop and start fixing furniture.
Sponsored by Kennedy Hardware, offering restoration hardware for antique furniture. I often get questions from customers about how old their pieces of furniture are, and dating a piece like this can be difficult. When you're looking at 20th century or even late 19th century furniture, typically there's a stamp of the factory where it was made. But in a case like this, there's no identification like that. So that's why I rely on books like this. This is Upper Canada Furniture. So this tells me about some of the oldest furniture in Canada, so I can look at the details here and see if they match up, so I can start to understand how potentially old this is. I love this book because it's got so many detailed examples of furniture. I'll leave a link in the video description. So this storage chest here has drawers in it. That's not what our chest looks like. This one here is dovetailed on the corner. Again, not what ours looks like. But this is an example of a 6-board box. Each side of this chest would be made out of a single board from a tree. Here we've got some examples of storage drawers in these, so that's not the example we've got. Here we've got some turned legs. Again, that's not the example. So I'm looking at the base here to find something that matches this blanket box. Here, this is too ornate. And here, this is exactly what we've got. So we've got the same base that's going on here. All three of these examples have faux finishes on them. This one has evidence of a finish on it that was probably paint. So these are from the mid-19th century, the second quarter of the 19th century. So I don't think we've got one that's that old because none of these three have moldings on them. So that's the next hint I'll show you. Here above the base, we've got moldings, and these moldings are very wide. So these likely were not produced by hand. That would have been a tremendous amount of labor to do that. So I would say this is produced somewhere after the machine age started, probably the late 1800s. The other reason I say late 1800s is because there's evidence here of square cut nails. Square cut nails were typically used up until 1900. After that, they were round nails, similar to what we use today. Before I start on the repair, I want to understand the potential value of this piece, so I'm preserving that value. I can tell that this has already been refinished once or twice because it's not the original color. There's also evidence of wood repair here. The original hardware is not on it, it's been replaced. So this piece here doesn't have a lot of monetary value, but it does have sentimental value for the customer. So I'm going to focus on making this functional versus preserving history. I'll show you what I mean by modifications to this chest. You see the grain pattern that we've got in this wood here? This is old growth pine. This is a brand new piece of pine. So this strip has been added on to the end. If we look at the locking mechanism at the front here, I can see that the mortise is too large for the lock. So here we've got a border, and if we look at the keyhole, this opening is much too large for this particular lock. So that's not the original lock that was on this piece. And then if we look at the hinges, here you can see they've been blocked up. So these aren't the original hinges that were originally on this chest. So these are some hints you can get to understand if you're dealing with an original piece or not. Now the first thing I'm curious about is if this lock works or not. Kennedy Hardware, a proud sponsor of ours, has a set of skeleton keys. So what I'm going to do is see if I can get a key that will match this because the customer doesn't have the key. Here's my set of skeleton keys from Kennedy Hardware. I'll leave a link in the video description. So let me check here and see. Oh no, there's nothing inside this lock for the key to turn. It's just an empty mortise lock. This lock not working actually works in my favor. The latch that's on the edge of the lid here goes inside the lock, and it prevents this from moving forward or backward, and that's a problem. The wood here needs to expand and contract. So seasonal wood movement happens across the grain. In the summertime, when there's a lot of humidity and moisture in the air, the wood expands like a sponge. In the wintertime, when there's less humidity in the air, it shrinks. And if you stop that movement from happening, the wood will break. And that's the problem we have here. So I'm going to take off this latch here so that the wood can move once I fix this. The key challenge is gluing it together. It looks like the person doing this work didn't have screws the right size, so they cut the ends off. Steel screws that are slotted can be hard to source, but Kennedy Hardware sells them. I'll leave a link in the video description. I'll close the lid now so I can glue this back together, but the straps that are here have some modern nails in them. I need to extract these as well. So what we'll do now is we'll look at this glue joint here, and I'll put this upside down so we can take a look at the two surfaces at the same time. Let's take a look at the glue line here because it tells a story about why this repair failed. Right here there's a glob of glue, and that's PVA glue. So carpenter's glue, yellow glue. And I can see there's all kinds of residue on both sides here. There are very few spots that have wood that looks like it's broken, which is where it would have held together. So what this means is someone applied glue here and they didn't have a tight joint. If you don't have a tight joint and you don't clamp that joint, PVA glue or high glue won't hold. So what we'll need to do is clean this off, make sure we get a nice tight joint, and if we don't, we're going to have to use a different type of glue. I'll start by scraping with a paint scraper, but before I even get going, you can see that there's paint here in the joint. And this piece is loose. So there might be a couple splits here I have to deal with. Now there's also a difference in the color of glue. You can see here it's lighter, here it's darker. I suspect this darker glue, let's see. Yeah, you see how crunchy that is? That's hide glue. So this has been glued a couple of times. Here's a close-up of PVA glue, and what you'll see is it's much more rubbery than hide glue. Hide glue is typically brittle, but you see how flexible this is? It makes it more difficult to take off. In some cases where I've got grooves here, I'll get out my chisel and I'll clear those out. I need to make sure I've got all the adhesive, all the paint out of these grooves so we can make sure we've got a nice solid joint. I've cleaned off the top and the bottom here, and you can see the difference between this area that's not cleaned, so significantly different. All of the glue has to come off here, so the glue has something to stick to. I'm looking for bare wood here. And down here I've got the split, but I've got it cleaned out enough that it will come together tightly. I'll continue to work down here to clean off the glue, and I can put it together and see how well the pieces mate. So here's some of the glue I took out between the two boards. PVA glue doesn't stick to PVA glue. The boards actually have to touch for PVA glue to work. Here's another example. It's just a squiggly glue line and the boards are squished together. The last step here is just to clean off the glue here, and then we can test fit it. Snug this up and get the fibers lined up as best as possible. And yeah, we've got gaps. So gaps along here, gaps along here. The only glue that's going to work where you've got a gap is epoxy. So that's our solution here. There are a variety of different glues and they all work differently. So it's important to understand which glue to use. We've got a guide here on how to choose the right glue. It also has the back of the page that talks about the various types of glue. This is part of our membership program. We've got downloadable reference sheets that you can print off, put in a binder, and use as you're working in your workshop. So if you're interested in that, go to fixingfurniture.com and you can check out our membership program. The next thing I need to do is work out a clamping strategy for this. Clamping front to back isn't an issue, but there's a hump right in the middle here, and if I push down on this, it lines up the parts well. So what I need to do is add some weight to the top of this, so that will line up my parts here, and then I can glue it, clamp it front to back, and we'll be good to go. The other thing I want to do is make sure that the epoxy won't drip inside the blanket box here. So I'll use some packing tape, put it on the underside here, and that will protect it. I'm all ready to mix up the epoxy. It's a 2-part solution, and it's something that cures by chemical reaction. And you need to be wearing an organic cartridge respirator. That's the only thing that will protect your lungs from the harmful damage that this stuff can do. It's one thing I see people missing when they're doing epoxy work. Make sure you've got the right PPE and make sure you read the safety data sheet. So once I've got this put together and I've got it clamped, it's going to sit for 24 hours and that will allow the epoxy to come to full strength. And then what I can do is work on disguising the crack that we've got in here. I've got a great tool. I'll show you how to do that. After I wipe off the excess epoxy, the secret to cleaning this up is white vinegar. This was a tip shared from one of our viewers. If you've got other tips that help you in your workshop, please feel free to share them. The epoxy is now fully cured, and that means I can take all the clamping off. Fully curing means it's come to full strength. So I can take this off and we can take a closer look at how this all came together. So there's a gap in the top here we need to disguise, and I'll show you that in a minute, but a new issue has shown up here. This is set back from the front, and that's different than what it is over on this corner where it's flush. So I'll need to undo the hinges at the back here and adjust that so it fits properly. A close-up look here shows that the epoxy has settled into that gap and it's left enough for a wood filler to go in, so we can disguise that as best as possible. I'm going to start by adjusting the screws here. I'll take the lid off, and when I do, I'm going to tack a square cut nail in each of these. Now you might wonder why this nailing strip here hasn't caused issues with wood movement. Well, nails are flexible enough that they allow for a little bit of movement. If I were to put a screw through here, it's rigid enough that there would eventually be a crack that would form along where that screw is. So square cut nails are what I'm going to use here. You can also use pin nails as well, something that's flexible enough just to allow for a bit of that movement. I'm just going to mark this hinge location before I take this off. I do this with tape, that way I'm not leaving any pencil marks or cut lines on the original piece of work. Before I take the screws out, look at the odd angles that these are screwed in at. I wonder if someone had a problem adjusting this hinge. I've taken the hinge off the chest so I can line up the holes. Now, to do this accurately, what we should be doing is using a hinge bit. This is a pretty cool technology. The holes and hinges are countersunk to accept a flat screw. So the way a hinge bit works is, it's also got a bevel on it, and it nests inside, and when you turn it over and you start drilling, the drill bit is automatically centered in the hole. so you get accurate results every time. I'll leave a link in the video description. I've got some square cut nails here that I've kept from years gone by. Let's see if I can find some small ones that'll work for the lid here. These ones, yep, those will work. I'll just take off the packing tape and clean off any of the excess glue here. I'll put those nails in and I can put the lid back on. When driving in square nails, you need to put in a pilot hole just to make sure you're not going to split the wood. And then you can drive it home. The orientation needs to be the same as the others here, so they're going this direction. Just like that. Now that's much better. Before I start filling the crack, there's the odd spot here that's a little bit too shiny, so I'll just take some 4-aught steel wool, rub it down, and that gets it the same sheen as everything else. I'm going to fill this crack with burn-in wood filler, so it's just a matter of choosing the right color. I've got a soldering iron and a plastic razor blade. I choose my colors based on the background color. This one looks like the closest. And then something that's just a little bit darker, I think that will help. And I'll mix these as I go along. So here's the technique that I use. What I do is melt in some of the lighter color first. And then what I do is add some of the darker color to sort of tone it as I go. And you will find that when you work on a crack this long, that there is a different color mixture needed as you move along the piece with a variety of the wood color. Then we come back with a razor blade, smooth it out, and see how the color matches. It's looking slightly dark, so I need something lighter. So what I want to do is melt what I've got in there, add some lighter color, and that will bring the color up. So I'll work my way across the crack here and disguise it as best as possible. I've got some colors here that are starting to blend in, but if I try to disguise all of this, it's going to look like wood filler. So I'm going to embrace some of the defects that are in this, dig it out a little bit, and just make it look like the rest of the chest. I'm happy with the fill now, so I'll go over it with steel wool, and then I've got some garnet shellac. That will darken down these areas that are a little bit lighter and make it look like the rest of the chest. Shellac is a traditional finish, and it's easy to put on, and it dries very quickly. I'll repair a few of these spots here that are damaged as well. As I'm putting the finish on, I noticed that there's an absence of flaws in a few spots here. So what I'm going to do is connect the dots, and then I'm going to put some stain in here. And the reason this is important is it distracts the eye from what's going on here. So if there's a random pattern in it, you're not going to notice it. So there's a few scratches here. You can see this one here, for example. It's supposed to come across here. So I'll enhance a few of these with some stain, and that should help blend everything together. The storage chest is now ready to go back to the customer, but they brought me a second piece, and that's this pre-confederation table. It's much older, and I'll tell you about the history of that in the next video. There's a number of issues here that I have to go through and diagnose and solve, as well as the drawer isn't running properly, it's missing some parts. So we'll get into that in the next video. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe and click on the bell notification, and you get notified every time we publish a video. You can also sign up for our newsletter at fixingfurniture.com. I'll leave you off with another video here for you to enjoy. Thanks for watching Fixing Furniture.